Canada's food banks are sounding the alarm, releasing a staggering new report that shows monthly food bank visits have doubled since 2019. Joining us now to break down the findings is Food Banks Canada CEO, Kirstin Beardsley. Kirstin, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so what stands out to you most in this year's hunger count report? Who is being hit hardest right now?
Well, the first thing that stands out is just the number. We're now seeing 2.2 million visits to food banks in Canada every month. So that's staggering in and of itself. As you said, that's doubling since prior to the pandemic. What really stood out to me was the number of people who are employed who are coming to food banks. So that number has been growing. Now, 1 in 5 people who come to food banks have jobs. And instead of stopping at the grocery store on the way home from work, they're having to stop at the food bank because their incomes aren't matching their expenses. We always see it's really hard to see the number of children who rely on food banks every single month. So about a third of the folks relying on food banks are children, which is so concerning. And then the number of two-parent households. So folks from every part of the country and everyone that we see in our day-to-day lives is affected by hunger.
And Kirstin, Ontario and Quebec are seeing record numbers, each with well over 700,000 monthly visits. Why are those two provinces experiencing such a high spike compared to others?
Yeah, what we're seeing is we're in places where cost of living is high, folks are really struggling. So one of the things that struck me in this year's hunger count was just how much folks are spending on essentials. So about 70% of people who use food banks pay market rents. And about 70% of their entire income goes towards housing. And when you add on other essential costs like food and transportation, you're looking at folks at the lower income quintiles spending over 100% of their income on those essentials. So every single month falling further and further behind. And then as a society, we don't have a lot of safety nets. You just fall deeper and deeper into this hole. And so you automatically are in need of a food bank or another community service to help make ends meet.
And Kirstin, Manitoba also stood out with a 97% increase compared to 2021. What's driving the surge in need there? Is it the same thing as Ontario and Quebec?
Yeah, it's exactly that. So we've seen costs grow much faster than incomes, in particular for folks who are, as I said, at the lowest end of the income spectrum. Their incomes have not grown nearly fast enough to catch up with things like rent and food. And what we're saying is rent eats food, right? You can't take a couple of days off from paying your rent each month, but you can take a break on food. And that's what we're seeing, folks skipping meals, folks compromising their nutrition, and then turning to food banks because otherwise their budgets simply don't work. You have to put money towards rent. And so it's shocking, right? It took food banks started in the 80s. It took decades for us to get to 1 million visits a month. And then only 5 short years later, we're at 2.2 million visits a month. So this is a problem that really has grown in the last number of years. And we really need to see government action. We want next year's hunger count to come down.
Well, the report shows that 1 in 5 people who rely on food banks, and you sort of touched upon this, but they actually have jobs. So,
Yeah.
and we've been talking about this, but just what does all this say, do you think, then, about the state of affordability and income here in Canada right now?
I just think too many folks are struggling. Too many people are not able to make ends meet. And what I think about is not just the stress that that causes for those individuals, those kids, when we think about the worry of not going to school with no food in your lunchbox, but what that does for a country, right? We want to make sure that we have what we need to thrive, to be strong, to meet the challenges that we're facing.